Kiko het proyecto ta pues nos tabay tra junto con el Wade Institute of nanta duna nos regla nang of consejo nang con nos por tra con el Ocean. Con het tabay precies.
A idea es aquí, nos como gobierno traer un manejo duradero para manejo de nos aguas costal y océano. Y Wade Institute está un instituto de técnico de experto que ayuda a nos desarrollar el plan el papel de fase promé camina lo bini programa educativo programa para sensibilizar etc. también esta visa que bini sistema camina nos pone ayuda técnico riba terreno legal para desarrollo de ley pero en otra fase también tiene que ver con implementación con gobierno, lo bínico sistema para garantizar continuidad y durabilidad de manejo con nuestra palabra. Esta esencia de MOU aquí nos está dando ayudanza por un instituto con lo no costa nos, pero de otra banda, gobierno tiene que dar su compromiso, su garantía, en lo cual nos trae palabra, nos realmente lo implementarán.
En práctica é bonificar que em certa área na Corsou, na onde nos não por construir mais cerca do oceano.
Esa es una posibilidad, pero más bien el unificar que en construcción, en desarrollo de planes de construcción, nos lo tiene que tener en cuenta que el efecto para el daño a los océanos. Anteriormente tiene que ver 4 medidas que tiene que tomar para evitar eso.
Ahora, eigenlijk no tiene regla en riba de situación.
No, no tiene.
Ayana, I have a question for you. That you give the minister any advice on overfishing, because here in Curacao, our own fishermen are not. They do not have the tools to overfish, to do it for industrial purposes. So, that you give any advice to prevent overfishing, let's say, like that.
So one of the unfortunate aspects of overfishing is how little fishing it takes to overfish. So even in Jamaica, I believe it was in the 1920s when they would have just a few canoes with hand-woven nets along the coast. Even that was able to decrease the fish stocks there. So that's just one example of the need for very careful management of reef fisheries. That's not to say that fishing shouldn't happen. We definitely think that people should continue to fish. Mr. Waite is motivated in part, small part, by his love of seafood and wanting his children to continue to eat it as well. So I think the perception that local small-scale fishing cannot deplete fisheries is one that needs to be changed, because if you think about how long it takes a fish to grow to reproductive size, some groupers don't reproduce until they're 10 years old or older. So we can definitely catch them faster than they can reproduce. So it's just a matter of thinking about how to manage fishing more carefully and set aside some areas where fish can grow very large. One of the major changes in Curaçao's fish population over the past few decades is there are not very many large fish anymore, and those large fish are disproportionately important for reproduction. So it's sort of the opposite of humans. So fish, when they get older, they make more babies and healthier babies as they age. So making sure that there are a lot of large fish is also important. But more generally, I think this may get also to your point, controlling any potential illegal fishing in Curaçao's waters, or foreign fishing, or destructive fishing with particularly destructive types of fishing gear will certainly also be something that we continue to discuss. So this is certainly not about targeting small-scale fishermen in small boats who are trying to make a living and feed their families. It's about finding that balance between meeting the needs of today while also being able to meet the needs of the future.
Thank you. I would like to address my question to Ms. Ayana. There is for some quite a while already discussions if we have to develop the east side of our island with hotels and buildings and such. What do you suggest? Do we have to do it, or maybe this can damage this side of the area of Curacao?
Well, first I should say I haven't actually seen the development plan, so I can't really comment on what the potential impact of the plan would be. But I can say that I've been diving at East Point, and they are some of the most beautiful reefs in the Caribbean. And I can say that development certainly has the potential to damage reefs, especially if it's really close to the coast. My comments can be very general here because I haven't seen the plan, but as far as coastal development goes, there are a few major concerns that have to be mitigated. One is pollution, as you said, whether the wastewater and sewage would be adequately treated and not pollute the water, which would damage the corals. The other is whether the construction itself would result in sedimentation, so silt or sand or dirt running into the reef and smothering it over the short term or the longer term. And the third is physical damage by any boats or other things coming in and out. So those are three of the major concerns to be aware of for any coastal development project. I can't comment specifically on the East Point plan, as I haven't seen it yet, but I can say that those are magnificent reefs, and that they are part of your cultural heritage that makes Curacao so special, so that I would hope that when the development plan is being considered, that finding a way to protect those reefs while doing whatever else the government decides to do, I hope that that's considered very thoroughly.
Another question. What are the benefits, if you can mention with some examples regarding the reefs of Curacao for us?
Can you be a little more specific?
If you can mention the coral reefs of Curacao, especially mention the east side of Curacao, is very important, as I have understood on the long run. Can you mention specifically how important and give some examples about it?
Sure. So it's been a while since I was diving on that side and seen it myself. I've seen more recent pictures. I've been diving at Playa Canoa and Boca Patrick back in the days where I was a little bit more interested in danger. It can be very rough there, as you all know. So the reefs in that part of the island on the north coast are very interesting because they have very large old corals, and they have these branching corals that look like trees, the staghorn and elkhorn corals. They also have more sharks there, and sharks are a really important part of the ecosystem and keeping it in balance. I know that a lot of people are scared of sharks in the water, but they are very critical to keeping the ecosystem intact. They have an important role to play in keeping things in balance. And the reefs off of East Point have some similar attributes in terms of just the amount of coral there compared to other places, and the health of that coral there. The level of disease is almost certainly less there, although I haven't checked those numbers recently. So the way that scientists measure the health of a coral reef, there are a few different metrics. So if you imagine looking down at a reef and taking a photograph of it, what scientists do is they say what % of that photograph is live coral. So the reefs on the North Shore and the reefs at East Point, if you look down and take a photograph, they have the most live coral. You also want to look at the % of the coral that's diseased, even if it is alive. You want to look at the % of it that's algae. So reefs have a tendency to be overgrown by algae, and that's a real problem because algae grows very quickly, and it actually grows even more quickly often when there's pollution that puts nutrients into the water that help it grow, like fertilizes the algae. Whereas coral grow very slowly. The average rate of coral growth is 1 centimeter a year. So when scientists look at a reef, they look at the balance between coral and algae, and you want there to be a lot of coral and very little algae. And the way that you get that to happen is by having a lot of herbivores on the reef, a lot of animals that are eating the algae. And here in Curacao, that is mostly the parrotfish, the gutu, and the sea urchins, the zay apple. They eat the algae off the reefs and keep it clean. So that's critical. Algae amounts are going up across the Caribbean. So some protections for the gutu and the zay apple are going to be important to consider as part of this if you want the reefs to stay coral reefs and not turn into algae reefs. So those are a few of the things that scientists look at when we think about whether a reef is healthy or not as the coral. As the fish, we think about also the diversity. That applies to the coral as well. How many different species are there? How large are they? And how many are there? And from those metrics, Curacao is better than some other places, but you are certainly not the best. There's a large room for improvement as regards the number of fish and the size of the fish around the island. So I think the summary would be that Curaçao's reefs are in good shape comparatively, but not in great shape as an absolute determination.
Another question. Our water is surrounded by lionfishes. What are your personal experience with the lionfish?
So my most intimate experience with lionfish is that they're delicious. Everyone should eat them. They taste kind of like grouper. I know there had been some concerns when they initially showed up that they were poisonous. They're not poisonous. They're safe to eat. They have venom in the spines along their back, so don't touch them. It'll hurt. They'll sting, but they're perfectly safe to eat and they're delicious. And I know that Faisal and others are very actively catching them. The concern that you allude to is that lionfish are not a native species. They come from the Pacific and Indian Ocean. So once they got here, they had no natural predators. So their population really exploded. They have very big appetites. They eat a lot of baby fish, especially grouper and snapper. That is a concern because the fishermen here want to be catching those. So that's one reason for concern. They also make a lot of babies very quickly. So they reproduce much faster than a lot of native species, and there's nothing eating the lionfish yet, although the hope is that other species will learn to start eating them over time. I was actually here doing my PhD in 2009 when the first lionfish was found in Curacao, and one of the dive shops called me and gave it to me in a diving glass, a mask case, and it lived about this big, the fish. It lived in there for a whole week without any food or any fresh water. So that's a good example of how robust they are, and so why it's important to control. You can't probably eliminate them completely. Most scientists think the lionfish are here to stay in the Caribbean, but there is evidence that the numbers can be controlled locally by continued efforts at management. And I'm optimistic because if we can be so effective as a human species depleting fish populations and things on land, surely if there's something we actually want to get rid of, we could probably do a good job of that on purpose.
Okay, thank you, Sparrow.
Mandari Arelis no space. Pergunta tanang que vai tra de dos pier. Essa aqui pode trazer daí na nos awanang anto si atuma conta que essa aqui tem projeto não.
La que mi pensa netamente per motivo è dove si trae un plan nacional que qualche altro progetto che vota bezig con lo vota niet in cuenta con di mes ora ta sinaleu lo mestiasi estudio nan je impacto de proyecto y así ne por tomar medida nan. Pero en el momento en que nos no tiene un sistema estructural PCI y por motivo ahí nos pensa que lo está en su lugar para el gobierno viene con manera estructural de manejo ese de mes también acompañar con su marco legal, pero más importante también concientización de gente de comunidad y buena para por sostener un programa así.
Dus agora que esse trabalho no rato até hora que o projeto começar a start, pessoal tem duas fases, a senhora explica. Agora pas hora que a primeira fase passa trabalhar com trabalhar assim com Pierre.
No, mientras que todo el proyecto no está ganando, bobo bisa paralelo van de otro, lo tiene cuenta con aspecto aquí. Que me dice el proyecto de construcción de 2 megaper, la que nos dice como también concretizar otra luna de mes, el tipo de estudio aquí también lo me está caibao de je. La idea no está para aguantar desarrollo, pero en todo caso para venir con un sistema de manejo duradero.
Good afternoon. You have been mentioned especially the coastal waters, but on this island we have also inner bays or lagoons like New Haven and Waikhat. Are you going to pay attention also to this kind of waters?
So Minister Whiteman has specifically asked us to make sure that we're including that to the extent that we can provide the technical support for inner waters and bays as well. So we're working on figuring out how exactly we can provide data on those areas. In particular, we have an interest in thinking about those inner bays and waters as nursery habitats for the fisheries. So where you have mangroves in particular, if anyone has questions about mangroves, you should talk to Stephanie Roach, who is our mangrove expert on the team. It's probably her favorite favorite organism. So we think about coastal shallow waters and bays as how that interacts also with the ocean. So it's a nursery habitat, it filters pollution coming from land and sediment coming from land. Mangroves can provide protection from storms. So making sure that coastal habitats are intact more than just the reefs is certainly something that we'll be keeping an eye on and supporting decision making on to the extent that we can be useful.
Okay, do we have also a communication plan to address better to the local people?
So we haven't gotten too much into the details of doing a timeline or a communications plan. We wanted to focus first on everything that needed to be done to get this memorandum of understanding into place. But I can say that communications is certainly something we'll be focusing on very heavily. The Waite Institute in Barbuda, where we have a Blue Halo Initiative project as well, during the 17 or 18 months that led up to from the time the project was launched until their new laws were put in place. We went through 7 rounds of community consultation where the community got to weigh in on different government proposals. I interviewed over 70 of the key stakeholders, which sounds like not very many, but the island is only 1,500 people. There were 5 rounds of consultation specifically with the fishermen there. There were 22 meetings with the local government to discuss things. So as far as the process, we want to make sure that everyone who wants to weigh in has that opportunity. So whether that's through press conferences like this to get the word out, through our website, and we're going to be talking about the best way to set up public meetings to keep people informed and seek input. The MOU also includes the creation of a stakeholder committee so that all of the different sectors will be represented and consulted regularly through the process. But we don't have very detailed plans on communication as yet, but we do have this concept, this vision of wanting to be very transparent and provide as much information as we can to anyone who's interested, and approach this project as a collaboration. So not with the government alone, but also with local entities like Karmabi and the dive shops and the fishermen's associations and the neighborhood associations, so that we can get the best ideas as possible from the community to feed them into the policy decisions. When I was interviewing fishermen here, those 132 interviews, I also interviewed over 100 dive instructors. And that was really interesting to understand how both groups are thinking about and using the ocean. But the most important question I asked to either group was, if you could write the laws to manage the ocean here, what would they be? And people have a wide array of very useful ideas and proposals. And so tapping into that local knowledge and local expertise is something we'll definitely be focusing on.
Okay, thank you, Shara. Yves Cooper.
Ms. Johnson, who's going to monitor what the government is going to do?
That's a good question.
Yes.
So one of the things I didn't mention as far as the timeline and our team is that we'll be hiring a site manager. And that's someone who will be an employee of the Waite Institute, but living in Curacao most of their time, to facilitate and manage the process, to help to keep people informed, to support the government in whatever that they need. So having a site manager here really focused on the project and making sure it's successful is something that we're just advertising the position now. So that person will hopefully be in place here within the next few months. And as far as because the rest of the team is working on other islands as well. So this is the third Blue Halo Initiative site. The first was Barbuda. We launched in Montserrat last week, and now Curacao, and we're planning to launch a new one once a year after that. So we're all going to be not so much watching, but supporting however we can, and just keeping track of the commitments that we've both made here today, and sort of seeing how best we can make that work. Ultimately, whatever policy decisions are made are certainly to be made by the government, and we're just here to provide recommendations and information. So we don't have, if in the worst case scenario, there is a list of reasons in here that the Waite Institute can back out if this initiative is no longer a priority for the government or is opposed by the majority of the people on the island. So our concept is to only work where our help is needed and wanted and will actually be useful. So we don't want to force ourselves or any particular policy initiative. We want to support the comprehensive management of the entire waters.
Yes, so what's the missing point, in our laws? There must be something, there must be something we are not doing good. What's the missing point?
I think there's not necessarily a missing point. I think most of the islands in the Caribbean, in most of the countries in the world, think about ocean management one piece at a time. So think about one protected area, yes or no, and what shape should it be and what size should it be, or one source of pollution or one type of fishing. But thinking holistically, comprehensively about how to balance all of the uses of the ocean at once is something that's only really beginning. So it's not that Curacao is behind the times or out of date, it's that